Please watch the video until the end of it. Chapter 1. The Return to Willow Cove. He had known the Cove for years before he knew their names. Seasons had taught him where memory gathered most thickly, on the sandbar beneath the lighthouse, in the long shadows of beach grass, in the gulls' impatient cries. From his little house above the town, he watched summers rise and fall, and once many summers ago, he watched two young people cross the sun-washed lawn of the Willow house and disappear together into the sound of the waves. When Lydia Fairweather returned, the town took a breath. She arrived in an old cream sedan that had softened at the edges, the same almond coat she'd once worn younger, but with a new, guarded patience about her. The storyteller, he who sits at his window and remembers, noticed how the light lay differently on Lydia's face now. It had been taught to endure. She brought with her a daughter of 16, Claire, who carried the restless directness of youth and refused to look at the town as anyone's property. Lydia's husband, practical and distant, remained in another state, for work. He had sent money and excuses. He had not come to the Cove. Across the bay, in a house with pillars softened by salt, lived Daniel Rowe. He had once been wealthy in reputation and temper. Life had taught him sometimes to pay in quiet. His marriage, too, had become a ledger, polite dinners, polite silences. He had a son, Ben, who was the careful kind of boy who learned to keep his father unruffled. The world arranges meetings as if fate were a seamstress with a plan. Claire and Ben found each other on the first evening at the public pier, where teenagers gathered to dare the cold sea and the possibility of falling. They did not know the names that once tethered their parents to the same small tragedies and joys. They only knew that the other laughed easily and could be trusted not to let go. Chapter 2. The Quiet Reawakening. He remembered the first time Lydia and Daniel's paths crossed after the years. It was at the bakery on a humid morning where the air smelled of butter and coffee and the sound of the ocean was only a rumor. Lydia stood by the window, looking at a display of fruit tarts. Daniel came in with a paper under his arm, and for a beat the town forgot to move. There was a recognition that had nothing to do with the years between them. It was a recognition of two people who had once been very sure of one another and then had been made unsure by others. They spoke in sentences that skirted the past, remembering only when the tide of the conversation made it necessary to step into the truth. It was not dramatic. The country had taught them both to be modest in confession, yet something in Daniel softened. The guarded stiffness that had kept his household calm began to relax, and Lydia felt her own armor loosen as if by small and careful hands. They began to meet, always with reasons small and convincing. A book to return, a child's recital to attend, a discussion about whether the town's pier ought to be saved. The storyteller saw their glances become less accidental. He noticed how Daniel lingered when he walked Lydia and Claire to the ferry, as if the salt wind were a friend that might not betray him. Chapter 3. Youth's Reckless Truth. Meanwhile, Claire and Ben did not know how prescient their ardor would be. Teenagers in love are fearless because they believe themselves exempt from consequence. Ben taught Claire to dive off the pier. Claire taught Ben to watch sunsets as if they had never been seen before. Their fidelity served as a mirror to their parents, showing how easily passion could live if it were allowed. The town watched the young couple with a mixture of indulgence and concern. There were whispered assumptions about where that kind of devotion might lead. Ben's mother, practical and anxious, fretted at his changed hours. Claire's father, more distant than hers, only clenched his jaw in longer silences. When Lydia discovered Claire and Ben together late one night on the dunes, she did not stage a scene. She sat with them and spoke in the low voice that mothers use when they think of the future like a map of possibilities and pitfalls. Love is honest, she told them, and it will be patient where it can, but it will be stubborn where it must. The children listened as a storm might, aware and without shelter, yet not wholly afraid. Chapter 4, The Reckoning. Rumor is a curious thing that takes the shape of an accusation before it becomes a narrative. The town began to whisper about the grown pair who walked too close and spoke too long in the hush between dusk and dawn. Daniel's wife, Margaret, returned from an extended trip to find a brittleness in her household she did not understand until someone told her what other people were saying. Lydia's husband received a call from a lawyer in a suit who asked pointed questions about presence and propriety. The storyteller observed how propriety and desire tilt against one another. Lydia and Daniel found themselves at a crossroads. One path was to maintain decorum, to keep distance, to wall their tenderness behind a lattice of explanations and apologies. The other path demanded risk, a life lived honestly, even if it cracked the brittle things around it. They attempted both. There were afternoons when they resolved to remain apart and evenings when their hands found one another across a crowded room. There was a moment under a full July moon when Daniel took Lydia's face between his hands and said the words they had once saved for youth that never grew old. "If we do not now, when?" She answered by closing her eyes, not because she agreed with the recklessness, but because she could no longer deny the truth of her heart. They kissed, and for a brief, exquisite hour they were two people in love without the scaffolding of time. Chapter 5, Consequences and Courage. Consequences followed, as they always do. Ben and Claire's innocent rebellion became entangled with the scandal of their parents. Families argued. Townsfolk took sides as if what happened on the shore were a game with winners and losers. Ben's schooling was threatened by the disapproval of people who felt it their duty to correct the course of youth. Claire faced the cold shoulder of other girls whose mothers considered propriety a measure of worth. The storyteller, who had known other lovers and other summers, found himself moved not by the heat of scandal, but by the quieter courage that rose in its wake. Lydia chose honesty with her daughter and with her husband. She wrote him a letter that was not an ultimatum, but a clear account of what she could no longer pretend. Daniel faced his wife's disappointment and the slow unraveling of two households. He did not try to disguise his affection. He tried to be fair in the face of an unfair world. In the small, luminous space between consequence and courage, the young pair decided to stand before their parents with the look of people who understood that love could not be hidden and that to protect one another was also a risk. Ben spoke first, awkward and plain, explaining his feelings for Claire as if naming them might make them rarer and thus safer. The room was silent, for silence is the place where people weigh what is true against what is comfortable. Chapter 6, The Quiet Leaving. Sometime later, with the last of summer folding into a cool and honest autumn, the town received news. Lydia and Daniel would leave Willow Cove for a place where their pasts could not be called upon to judge them daily. They did not elope in the dramatic way that novels promise. They arranged their affairs with a slow, practical tenderness. The storyteller saw them at the ferry in the half-light, children and luggage, and a face lined with decision. Ben and Claire stood by as if they had been given the honor of witness. They embraced not as a child and a parent, but as equals who had learned the cost of choosing one another. The town's gossip receded, as summers do. The pier was still there the next year, the bakery window fuller with tarts. Life continued with the simultaneous cruelty and mercy of weather. The storyteller, he who had watched them and kept their confidences like shells in a pocket, held a memory of that last look Lydia gave the beach. It was not regretful, and it was not triumphant. It was the look of a woman who had finally chosen the shape of her life and accepted the consequences. He, being a man who had loved in his time and lost in others, knew that love's truth is not in dramatic declarations, but in the small acts of courage that follow them. He watched as the ferry pulled away and thought of the strange, inevitable way the sea takes and gives. Please subscribe to the channel, activate notifications, give a like to the video, comment the video, and share the video.